Welcome, everyone. We are glad to have you here. We have some online attendees. We are ready to start our 2023 annual State of the School address. My name is Eduardo. I am the chairman of the Dean's Council. Just came from a meeting, having bright ideas, so we have now to find somebody to do it. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. I'm together here with my fellow Dean's Council member, Absa, Samba.
Thank you. My name is Absa. I'm a second year MPA student, and I'm also on the Dean's Council. A little bit about the Dean's Council. We work with the Dean to help with strategic advising about the mission and the vision of the school. So my role there is to bring in some student perspective. And to get us started, we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The University of Washington is built on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish tribe. It is essential to acknowledge the people in whose land we live, land, and work. As we seek to improve and strengthen our relationships with tribal nations, we acknowledge that this country was built on land, theft and genocide within indigenous communities, and enslavement and forced labor within the Black community. Colonialism has ongoing impacts that require our active undoing. At the Evans School, we are committed to learning about our role in colonialism and racism through an anti-racism lens. We encourage you to join us and continue to deepen our understanding of your place of work within that history and the residual impact today and in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Absa. So we launched this ritual last year. It's a new ritual that we are thrilled to have you here to share results, to talk about the vision, talk about progress, and to share some questions and answers. It is an important opportunity for us to engage in collective sense-making. It's also good to hold a forum for discussions about the school after this and its relation to the larger environment. In terms of the structure today, in a few moments, Dean Jodi Sandfort will share an address, and then we will have an open questions and answers session. For those here in person, please hold questions until the Q&A time. A moderator will come to you to take your question when the time comes. For those online, please put your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom at any time during today's event. Our virtual hosting team will collect your questions and include them in the Q&A session.
And for those joining us in person today, following today's address, we will host an Evans Community Connect session at the Rimac Commons. This will be an interactive feedback session with various breakout topics focused on strategic planning around new and emerging initiatives. We would love to have your input and hope you can take part. We will also host a post-event reception with food and beverages at 4:30 p.m. to provide more opportunities to connect. And that will be all from me, and thank you for doing this again with me.
Thank you. Let's get started. It's now my pleasure to invite Dean Jodi Sandfort to give the State of the School address. Please.
Thank you, everyone. It is wonderful to have you here. And it's an honor because I know there are so many other places you could be, but you've chosen to be here to focus a little bit of time and attention on the Evans School and what we're trying to do and your role in it. So it's the turn of the year, and I find myself trying to make sense of what's happened in the last few years. I'm pausing because the PowerPoint is not working. Let me try again. And this has been an amazing 3-year period that I've interacted with this school. 2 years ago, when we were packing up our home to move to Washington to take this job, there was an insurrection at the US Capitol. Last year, we had to postpone this address for 2 months because the Omicron virus reared its head. And during this whole time, there has been so much that's been shifting and changing. The Evans School, we celebrated our 60th anniversary this last year. And here, I can do it. I can drive. And we continue to bring people to our school from across the country, from across the globe. There were variations in the students that came during that time. During 22 or 21, there were a huge number of students that came. And then in 20, it narrowed off. But over the 2-year period, we're pretty flat in our enrollment. Our PhD program is continuing to graduate students. We had 5 graduates in 2022. There's a growing undergraduate minor and other undergraduate programs that we're developing. And in 2022, we were rated 3rd among our peers nationally, including a rating of 2nd in environmental policy, 5th in nonprofit management, and 8th in public financial management. Our revenue and expenditures are strong, and our faculty are deeply engaged in bringing in funding that allows us to pursue questions that matter and engage the students deeply. So more kind of data about this year is found in this new hot off the press summary. So as I've been thinking about this year and the fact that we've just celebrated 60 years, I began to think about, okay, what do we want to be doing to set up the next 60 years? Right? What do we have to invest in now so that we're really leading, continuing to lead our field? Now, some of you know that I'm an organizational scientist by training. And one of the things that we know is that during time of disruption, like we've just lived through, institutions can be resilient. So we're seeing that in part in how the government is responding to the to the insurrection, that people over time are being tried and being held accountable for what they were doing in DC. But I also know that institutions can settle and not actually shift enough to respond to what we've learned during a time. And so I think that the Evans School has an opportunity, and in fact, an imperative, to not just settle into what was, but to really chart a course for what's the future of public policy education. We have so many assets. We have the talent of people in this room, students that are coming to us from across the world. We have our articulation of our vision. And that vision matters, I think, these days. And we've also clearly articulated values that can help us figure out how we're going to be together. So this year, I do think that there was a lot of movement forward. We had people thinking about how do we redesign and restructure, led by our students. So our students last year said, you know, we have too many groups that don't seem to be functional. We're just trying to keep the existing structure going with our Evans Students Organization and student interest groups. So we had a retreat in the summer. And these students leaders said, what do we need to be doing to have the right structure and the right activities given where we find ourselves now? We also in the last year have had significant change in our staff, from the most senior to the entry-level positions. And we've incredibly added amazing people here who are talented, who bring new diversity in terms of background, race, ethnicity. Many of them haven't worked at universities before. And so there's this opportunity to be bringing in learning from this great group of people. I mentioned our faculty and our graduate students. In the last year, they pursued and received an incredible number of investments from important public and private funders from across the globe to help support our work. Faculty are also considering new educational programs, and we've been refreshing our curriculum and engaging new learners. We've also really lived into the new part of our mission of hosting communities in co-creating solutions to important public problems. We've been practicing new forms of engagement and offering an art of hosting training to the University of Washington community. So I see all this activity is really taking this purpose we have and bringing it into practice. And this is really what I want to focus on today in my remarks. And I want to focus it also when you get into your community conversations later. Because I think there has to be an intentional relationship between this purpose and what we actually do, particularly if we want to have this time be a foundation for the next 60 years. So one of the paradoxes to me about higher education is that we are known for creating transformational learning experiences for other people. But sometimes we're not very effective at creating learning organizations ourselves. The quote on the slide comes from a colleague, Dick Elmore, who actually is incredibly famous in my little world of scholarship, policy implementation. He used to actually teach at the Evans School. He died recently, but he had emeritus professorship at Harvard. And this quote comes from studies that he did, like the ones I do, on how do systems change. I'm inspired by the capability of human beings to consciously modify understanding, attitudes, and beliefs over time in the presence of evidence, experience, and knowledge. To me, he was talking about changes he saw in K-12, but I think it's really apparent that that kind of capability is something that we have in higher education as well. But while people have the ability to change and learn individually, it's my job to figure out how do we create organizational capacity to learn. And I think that we're entering into a deeper, more challenging phase in our organizational learning, particularly around our organizational commitment to racial equity. And so to illustrate the work I think is ahead, I want to draw on some personal experiences that I've had in the last few months where I have been pushed to learn. And that learning has been filled with lots and lots of emotions. I've been challenged, I've been engaged, I've been destabilized, really humbled in ways that you can't even imagine. But many of you know I come from the Midwest, and I have always loved to swim. And I am a child of the 70s, and so I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau. Some of you in the room will know that name on PBS because he showed us that you could go underwater. And so I thought, I'm now living near the ocean. I can become like Jacques Cousteau. So I decided I wanted to learn how to scuba dive. And this is where the humility comes in. So scuba diving to me is something totally new. Like really, I knew nothing about anything. I didn't know anything about the gear or the principles of it. I literally had in my mind what I learned as an 8-year-old from watching Jacques Cousteau. But as some of you know, I can be kind of focused on a goal sometimes. And so I was like, I can do this. I'm a 54-year-old woman who never done anything like this before in my life. I can do this. So gratefully, the scuba people have a curriculum and a system and a way to get certified in open water diving. So I started first with their online training, right? It's great. Online training. I was watching videos And I was writing things down. And I was like, I'm a good student. I know how to study online. And I was trying to make sense of all of this new terminology, all of these new techniques. It was hard to remember things. I was having to take quizzes on things, and they were quizzing me on things that I didn't actually think they had told me. It was really humbling, but I got through that part. Then they put me in the pool. So you have to go in for 4 nights. After work, I'd go down and get in my little scuba gear in the pool. And it was okay at the beginning because you're in the shallow end. And they don't have you put in all of your equipment at first. So I did the first night, the second night, and then the second night, my ears started to hurt a little bit, but I was like, I'm gonna just keep going. I'll take Sudafed. And I was getting more and more comfortable to be in the pool. But then the weekend came and we had to go into Puget Sound in November. And this was a moment my husband turned to me and he said, you really think this is a good idea? And I said, I can do this. So the first day of on the open water scuba, it was freezing. I got in the water, I couldn't breathe, I was disoriented, I couldn't really see, but I got through. The second dive, we went out further and my ears clogged up and I had debilitating pain in my head. And I was like, I can still do this. And the teacher was like, no, you can't. You have to go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor and discovered I had a really massive ear infection. And I was so upset. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing this. So I called up, got on the waiting list for January. And then I thought about it every single day. Do I really want to do this? I don't know if I should do this. This is kind of crazy that I'm doing this. Why did I want to do this? Again and again, because it felt, I just couldn't imagine how this would be in any way fun. But I'm stubborn. I was like, okay, no, you got to do this. So I'm happy to say that 2 weeks ago, I went back in Puget Sound and I finished my open water. And then last weekend, I went to Florida and scuba dived again. And it was actually cool because Florida was really cold. It was, the guy who took me said it was one of the worst dives he had ever done. And I felt like it was so much better than ours, right? So I'm like, okay, great. Now I'm starting to plan trips of like where I can go scuba. So I wanted to offer this experience because it's an example of individual learning. And I think it illustrates what it's going to take for each of us individually and collectively to really step more deeply into our commitments about anti-racist action and realize our purpose. We are clear that we want to inspire public policy and inspire public service and democratize public policy. And we're also clear that we want to do so attending to service with courage and being real about equity. These are the words that we all agreed to almost 2 years ago about what why did we exist as a school and how we want to work together. So as a historically white institution, there's a lot of changes that we have to engage in. Our interpersonal interactions, the content that we're teaching, our programs, if we want to live by these values. And we've made progress. We've made progress in diversifying our faculty and staff, but the majority of the managers here are still white people. I'm still a white person, right? And so we have to be very intentional about this work if we want to learn organizationally about how to live to these values. And I also want to say, like scuba diving, many of us are novices, right? It's really, really hard for us to realize that the things that we know now, things that might be central to our identities, to our professional role as experts, might matter less in the future than we thought they would. When I first went into Puget Sound that first weekend, it was so disorienting. It was so humbling. And I think that is true in this journey we're on to develop an anti-racist organization. I think sometimes we don't realize how hard it is until we're in it. In this organization, people talk about understanding that our intent is different than our impact. We can get that intellectually. But when you get the first impact that your actions really harmed another person, it can totally throw you off guard. Just like having my mask where I couldn't see clearly underwater. We talk about so many things, and I think where we are now is getting clearer about how do we practice these things together. So I think we're really early as a school in learning how to be courageous about addressing the ways that white biases in ways of knowing what we thought were race-neutral practices really create disparate outcomes for people of color. We need to take risks and make mistakes. We need to lean into our relationships with each other, where when mistakes are made, and they will be, we respond with grace and humility. But if we want to live by these values of service, courage, and equity, we have to do it. Because I think the last few years in my mind have really taught us the importance of collective intention. And many of you know that doesn't mean spending a lot of time on plans. So I think I've brought a different kind of management approach to the Evans School, which serves the kind of learning I'm suggesting. It's active learning. And this is actually a model that I have used for years in my graduate classes. And I was like, I think I'll use it in my speech because that's actually what I think we're trying to do here. Okay? This model comes from pragmatist philosophers who believe that you know through things that you experience, rather than things you only have in your head. So many of you who work with me know that I talk a lot about prototypes. Let's just prototype something. That means let's just do something. And then let's observe what happens when we do it and assess it and analyze it to inform our decisions about what we're going to do next. It believes and requires all of us to be engaged in active reflection and mistakes. We will make mistakes as we go. So some of you picked up documents that we have. One of the things that I'm realizing in my role as a leader is you can't just do this. You need to have a little bit of structure. I always talk about light enough structure. And we have a 5-year blueprint for our equity and inclusion work. We have annual action plans. These are guiding documents, but it requires us to be actively involved in figuring out, we say we're going to do this. What happens when we do? Does it take us where we want to go? I think these practices help us live consistently with our values. And when we talk about equity, we say we want to discover and daylight disparities. We say we want to take anti-racist action. We say we want to dismantle systems of oppression. But this is not the default of public institutions. We have to work at it intentionally every day with the awareness that over time, this is the foundation for the next 60 years. So where are we at in this ambition? As I mentioned, the last year, 2022, was a time of real transition in the world and here. My attention was really focused internally this year, rebuilding the school and building more capacity for the organization in light of the values that we have. Faculty and staff were coming back into this beautiful building and beginning to feel like it's our home. And we were beginning to play with more technology-enhanced learning to really support student learning. I do think we have had some achievements in beginning to address white racial bias, and I want to go through them now. One is we're doing some really cool programming. A number of you in this room came to our 60th anniversary celebration where we started the practice of having new leadership awards. We have a Dean's Forum on Race and Public Policy that centers the racial foundations of policies and institutions. We have a Junior Summer Institute run with the national organization PPIA that Amen, the guy who's in the room, runs for us, which is welcoming rising seniors in college to Seattle if they come from historically underrepresented groups and they want to learn about public policy. We also have another undergraduate initiative. We have the International Program for Public Health Leaders, We've been doing some important programs in this space. We also have begun to make changes in our curriculum. We've used our standing as a national leader to offer professional development programs. The photo on the left is a national conference that my colleagues ran for our people across the country, talking about this work we're doing on curriculum. Mary Kay also represented us on a Dean's Forum, talking about these issues as well. We are continuing to make refinements in our own curriculum, and we've received positive responses to our accreditation, national accreditation process, and have those site visitors coming in a few months. Students who are enrolled in a course that we have on race and equity and public policy, we've offered it for 4 years, have been giving feedback to the faculty saying, this shouldn't be in the curriculum. This should be a prerequisite for the curriculum. And so we have a faculty work group that's exploring that right now. We have faculty who are thinking about the learning objectives for equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and we have refreshed our executive master's program after 20 years. That's the people on the right jumping up and down. So for students, these curriculum improvements help, and they are things that directly benefit them. But I want to also shout out a few other advances I think we've made. We've permanently eliminated the GRE as a requirement for admission for our MPA program because of the research showing that it has systemic bias in admissions. We've implemented a Dean's Fellows program that provides fellowship and mentoring and professional development to students. We've improved access to tutoring, and we've been trying to listen carefully. I've really been listening to the ways in which higher ed has this hidden second curriculum. Many of you who are first generation college students know there's like what's in the classes, and then there's all this other way that these people operate. So we're trying to make that explicit and bringing people into our team on student affairs who have that as an expertise. We're also trying to make documents accessible to students living with disabilities. We also, I think, have been trying to change our celebrations. So we had our first in-person graduation after 3 years. And the in-person talent show has come back, and it's going to be back next weekend as well. We started to have a community connect, like the one we're going to have this afternoon, but for students when they come to orientation. And we had a community book that we all read together, Homegoing by Yaa Agazi. I'm bringing it here because it's one of my favorite books, and if anybody hasn't read it, you should. I also want to say that our faculty have internalized this commitment and have been really impressing me and impressing our colleagues around the world with this kind of inquiry. So Karen Martin and Rachel Feil, along with a PhD student, have been doing a study to look at low-income tenants and their right to counsel. And they're trying to discern whether or not this right to counsel reduces the racial and ethnic disparities in eviction. Grant Bloom recently had an article published in one of the top public administration journals where he makes an argument very clear about the administrative power and how that has sustained racial inequity in the United States. Crystal Hall is doing national engagements and writing a book on behavioral science and race. Ben Brunges is a policy fellow at the US Small Business Administration, and he's working with them to update their federal procurement policies so that it delivers equity in outcomes. Seema Bishu has been working on women's engagement and decision-making and training people at the United Nations and countries from the United Nations in the nature of her work. And Ann Bostrom and colleagues is doing a project to understand the health risks of extreme heat, and particularly how it disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities. On the research side, we also have institutional things that we are stepping into. So Lee Anderson and colleagues have started this new center that's really working on this puzzle in the developing world. As climate change is getting more extreme, one of the funny things is that households have been adapting less. And so they're trying to figure out why that is. And what they're understanding is that it really is hinges upon, do people understand and appreciate the risks? Or is there something that scholars and policymakers need to change fundamentally so that people realize there are things that you can do in the face of extreme climate change? Institutionally, we've also invested in the Evans Policy Innovation Collaborative, which is doing applied engagement and design partnerships with state, local governments and philanthropy. Two projects I want to highlight. One is a project with the Secretary of State, where we are being brought in to look at the problem of Washington State. We have an amazing voter law, but we throw away ballots if the signatures don't match right exactly. And funny enough, it looks like there's racial bias in that voter rejection. And so the Secretary of State has come to partner with us because they want to design a better solution, not just study the problem. Similarly, we're working with the state Department of Employment Security on the paid family medical leave bill. Washington State has one of the most progressive paid family leave in the country. And yet colleagues Heather Hill have documented that it's not being enjoyed by all Washingtonians, and low income and Black and brown families are least likely to take up this benefit that could really help their families. So we are being brought in both to continue to document the problem, but help the state design a solution to this challenge. So I feel really proud of how we're leading the country in analyzing these racial disparities, the causes and the solutions. But each of these examples, the programs, the curriculum, the students, the celebration, and the research, I just want to emphasize these are moments where somebody had to learn, right? Somebody had to individually or collectively do something different. And for some of us, we were like, yeah, that's great. And others, that learning was really scary. It was disconcerting. It was a departure from what was known. It brings up very visceral emotions about success and heartbreak. Just like me under that water, trying to figure out, can I actually do this scuba? In our documents about this work, we say that to do equity and inclusion work, it requires intention, that it's going to take a lifetime, but that we need to start somewhere. And I think we've started somewhere. We also talk about we're going to make mistakes, and we need to practice grace and hold ourselves accountable. And again, I think we just have to do this if we want to be setting the foundation for the next 60 years. So I want to conclude by just saying, what do I think our next steps are? Where are we going in this kind of authentic learning? First, inside the organization, we need to continue to walk our talk. We need to continue to invest in our ability to innovate. Now, I mentioned I'm in organizational science. Innovation is one of these buzzwords. What it really means is the ability to do something new that hasn't ever been done in that place. So a lot of the stuff I've been talking about is innovation at the Evans School. We're going to continue to do that. I think we have to be explicit that we are an organization full of learners. There has never been a public policy school, certainly not a top public policy program, that is so committed to addressing the legacy of biases in policies and institutions. So given these aspirations, we need to continue to try to change what we're doing in light of that. We are doing a lot of new organizational processes. So our student affairs team is doing student-centered planning. We're creating new intentional work on external partnerships. Eduardo mentioned that we were just talking today in our Dean's Council about how to hone our understanding of the partnerships that we need to. We're also going to continue to work the plans we set out. That little diagram there are the 6 areas in our equity and inclusion blueprint. But part of it for me is honing our language. I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, there's a lot of buzzwords about all this race stuff, and We use the word diversity and inclusion, and these are words really about engaging across difference. That's a good thing, and we need to do it, and we need to do more of it. But equity is a word about justice, right? Equity is about shifting power dynamics and structures and systems. And in our materials, we use all of these words, and I think we just have to be careful that our practices are consistent with those words. The second thing I know we're going to do is continue to center community voice in policy and implementation. We've been asked to be stepping in to bring social science methodology, but also human-centered design into communities to help with the institutional redesign that is necessary. We are continuing to build out the Evans Policy Innovation Collaborative and to continue to bring attention and support to the community instructors and professors of practice who are bringing their knowledge to the school, because historically in academia, they haven't received the same kind of care and attention as other faculty. And finally, we are going to expand the pathways to public service. I mentioned we have these undergraduate programs. We are also expanding our minor with an eye that we will be introducing a public policy major at the University of Washington in the next few years. We've also just had the faculty pass a new graduate certificate, which is focused on engaging mid-career people who are working full-time and giving them some of the skills and talent skills, even though they don't want to get a full master's degree. And we also want to continue to build out fellowships and scholarships for current students, because graduate school and higher education in this time in history is really expensive. So to conclude, I just want to go back to this quote about learning and just say I feel very confident that I have been seeing this kind of activity in 2022 at the Evans School, and I know that we will see it in 2023. And just remind you that it is not always going to be easy. That is going to challenge us, but I think that we are up for the task. So before I turn to question and answers, I just want to thank the wonderful team that is supporting me and allowing me to give these reflections. Particularly, I want to shout out Daniela, who helped me get these beautiful slides together. So with that, I think we're ready to take some questions and answers. So I think we have a system that we can have both things happening virtually, right? And in the room.
Yes. So I will be walking around and taking the questions from students in the group.
So it's all dependent upon people in the room. No pressure. The underwater picture was not of me. But one of the things I've learned is that when you get into the scuba thing, people really get into the photography. But then that's a lot of extra investment. This already is not such a cheap hobby. My husband reminds me.
Takers. That one over here. Thank you, Actor.
First of all, I want to thank you for the address. And I think we've seen such an amazing change, especially since we moved into this building. So thank you very much for that. I know you started off by saying that you were dreaming about the next 60 years. Can you at least tell me 60 years from now, what do you think the school is going to look like?
I don't know. What I do know is that I hope that we are part of helping this country have places where people can work across difference to deal with the problems that we have in common. I hope that our school is understood by these values of head and heart, analysis and empathy. And I hope that we, because of that work, have more clear investment in public institutions. We were talking today at our Dean's Council, and Eduardo, who you've met, is expert in cybersecurity. And he was talking about, how things are changing, artificial intelligence, right? We've all been paying attention to the news. I feel like we're on the edge of something that will transform almost everything. And yet, we did a training for the Health and Human Service agencies in the state of Washington, and they are using mainframe computers from 1970. And these two things exist in this state. And I try to figure out, Akhtar, how as a school in this state, as a world-class school in this state, how do we deal with that disparity? So I think we have to get more people who understand that public investment is necessary. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be incredibly vulnerable, given how fast information technology is evolving. So those two things I think we really need to address. I look to my assistant dean of administration and finance because she gets so, I shouldn't say, she's very compassionate with me because I look at her and I say, really? We have to do it that way? I am spending quite a lot of time actually thinking about where are the places of innovation in the university where we can be associated. So there is a engagement center called the Ruckelshaus Center that is a partnership between us and Washington State University. I am the co-chair of the search for the new executive director, and that is part of the Evans School. We want to bring it closer. I'm also part of a group of deans who are thinking about what does the University of Washington want to be known for? And we've gotten coherence that we want to be known for public service, that any undergrad who comes here is feeling and experiencing a shift in their own identity to be about the public good. The project that I mentioned, the Next Gen Civic Leader Corps, is part of that. But I think we need to be thinking intentionally about all these people that we touch. How can we at the university make that part of their professional identity? And then I also complain a lot about things like the financial transformation system, the academic HR system, other things that I can't influence very much, but we try to work strategically within.
We have a question in the back of the room here. Thank you.
Dean Sandfort, you and I met about 3 years ago when you were new in your role, and I was new in my role, and we spent our first conversations kind of talking about Seattle exceptionalism and how Seattle is or is not different. Coming from the Midwest, I'm wondering if you can share what has surprised you about being in this role and being in this city.
I will say what has surprised me is how hard it is for me to understand this city and this region. And that's largely, I think, an outcome of COVID. It was very, very difficult for the first 18 months. You are one of the few people that in that first year I had dinner with, right? It continues to be something that is difficult. The institutions here are differently configured. And I guess I have been surprised that there is not a more cohesive sense of civic infrastructure that I would have expected given the espoused values in the political and the kind of national reputation. I also do think that this disconnect on technology between the private sector and the public sector has been an incredible surprise.
We have a couple of questions online. So I think we'll do both of those questions back to back. And if you have a question here in the room, raise your hand and I will come to you after that.
Great, thank you, Julian. So Professor Ann Bostrom would like to know, how do you see the relationship between the Evans School and other colleges and schools on campus changing? How have you changed them? And what is your vision for the role of the Evans School in the university going forward?
Great question, Ann. One of the things is 80% of the deans have been here 3 years or less, maybe 4 years or less. And so as a result, the deans have a very cohesive, collaborative group. We actually use some of the participatory methods that I talked about that we are bringing to the University of campus to run a 2-day Board of Deans and Chancellors retreat. And so there is a deep commitment to interdisciplinary work among the deans, which benefits the Evans School because we're all about interdisciplinarity. I think one of the ways that I concretely would like us to work is we have an amazing curriculum in public policy around its formation, its evaluation, its implementation. There are so many students at the university who would love to get a certificate, right, in that public policy. My colleagues, my other deans are asking for that. And now the graduate school has made changes to enable that. I think the other part of your question is policy is part of everything, right? And so as we grow, I hope that we can be thinking about joint appointments with other units and really thinking about how can we use this world-class university to increase people's understandings of systems and policy as they're generating their work and their students.
What other work is Evans doing to make the school more accessible to students with physical, psychiatric, and intellectual disabilities? Anti-ableist practice is an important societal shift, but I haven't heard much about how Evans is more forward in that arena.
I think this is a fair critique. I would say that under technology enhanced learning, Uriah Sebastian has been an amazing proponent and advocate for making sure that our classroom materials are shared in ways that are accessible to people with disabilities. I think that this building with the elevator and things is physically accessible, but it's not great, right? There's just one ramp that comes in the other side. I will also say that, well, I think we have work to do. I think we have work to do. To the question of access more broadly, this work around undergrads is really about access. And we are trying to find some public dollars to be able to bring some of these national programs to young students from Central and Eastern Washington that are going from, coming from colleges that might not normally have access to the University of Washington. And one of our other undergraduate programs, we have gotten resources to expand to Tacoma and Bothell, and they have a different composition of students. So I feel like that we're thinking a lot about how do we get people to think about and claim public service and have real pathways into a place like the graduate programs at the Evans.
I have a question in the back here in the room. And if you have any other questions, please raise your hand. I see one over there.
Thank you. My name is Karuba. So I just have a few questions. Like, is there any like particular plan you have regarding international students? Like when I came here, I would say my faculties were like really great, but I'm still struggling to cope up with, whole system and changing, the whole country. So yeah, like I would like to know about, some certain plans or any guidelines for the international students.
Thank you. Problem. We've started to talk a little bit about, is there an orientation session to help people understand the basics of US institutions, right? Because the reality of it is, this is a program that is really about the United States and its relationships in the world. But we can't presume that people, international students or even domestic students, know a lot about how that system is set up. I also talked with my new assistant dean of students about, are there ways of having programming, ways that other students could meet you at the airport when you arrive and help you get set up. I mean, I think it is this, we care very much about hosting people, but I don't think we have yet turned our attention appropriately to international students, because you are putting your whole life up in the air to come here, and we can be better at welcoming you, I think.
Dean Jodi, my question is about how you would plan to engage and support student leaders in walking the talk, as you stated, as it pertains to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
That's such a great question, because I feel like the students have been such amazing teachers to the faculty here. So I think I'd like to talk to ESO about your ideas. Right, part of it is I see that there's a lot of capability and knowledge, and so much of the change that happened before I came here was fueled by the student leaders. And so if you now think there's ways we can bring that back around, I didn't want to presume that we had much to teach, but perhaps we do. And she's on ESO, she's in the leadership team, so putting it back on her.
I have a couple more questions in the room. I'm going to take one more, and then I think we also have an online.
Hi, I'm Tiba. Question kind of follows the earlier question on international students. I'm a faculty here and I come from a different institution, and truly this institution, at least the Evans School, is a leading institution in speaking about the anti-racism and the value of equity. So my question is more looking internally. How do we know the impact of the values, the policies, or the work that we do has on staff, students, faculty? Like, how do we know if the work we're pitching outward is actually being practiced and even being meaningful to people that it matters to?
So last year, thank you. Last year, our Equity Council had a lot of councils. It had a town hall every month to explore that question. How is this stuff impacting you? What is the next level of work to do? This year, the council decided to not do that, but are talking about, are there other ways to gather that information systematically? As part of our annual equity and inclusion blueprint process, we have this process of setting the plan with the community in September and then taking stock in June. So last year, again, there was a report that Claire isn't in the room, but that some of our students in the council did. I'm expecting we will do a similar thing this year. So that's like the formal stuff. I also think there's a lot of informal listening that happens. Yes.
Experiential learning seems like a very important part of public service.
that our colleague Grant Bloom has just gotten a seed grant to allow him to work with students this spring to develop a study abroad program in Louisiana. And it is focused actually on this topic that I've been talking about today, to compare public institutions and processes in Louisiana with those in Seattle, not assuming that Seattle has it figured out, but to provide the contrast. And students will go there for a couple of weeks and then be engaged in that analysis. So that is our little foray into study abroad. It's being funded by the Study Abroad program. We also are going to refresh and relaunch, I guess, our global MPA program, which has students in residence at the Evans School for 1 year, and then with a partner institution in the 2nd year. So it's not exactly study abroad, but it's kind of the way graduate school, the way that happens.
We have a question, and then we'll go back to the group.
Next quarter and how that came to fruition.
I'm excited for my class. I am teaching in the spring. I have not taught since the fall of 2020. I'm very eager to get back in the classroom. I'm teaching a course on public policy implementation, which is the area that I've written a book in and done a lot of research in the last 25 years. The class first, well, my whole interest in this came about because my parents are teachers and I was interested in policy. And my parents always complained about the policymakers and the people who ran the organizations. And so the research I've done over time is at the policy level, the organizational, the frontline level. And so the class teaches students to study implementation at those multiple levels. It's also using technology enhanced learning so that we are doing together face-to-face what we need to do. We can do things virtually with virtual lectures asynchronously, and people can do field research about their areas of interest. So if you want to learn about policy implementation, take my class.
Okay, we have time for one more question in the room. I know that we had hand raised.
Hi, Jodi. I'm Rosie. I'm a 2nd year MPA student. And I have a similar question to Carrie, but around not just engaging student leaders, but engaging students more broadly and soliciting feedback from them, both about their experience at the school, as well as with the curriculum specifically. And I'm wondering sort of how that's done when the churn of students happens so quickly and we're not here for very long, sort of in the grand scheme of blueprints and strategic plans that are 5 or 10 years long. And for us students, sometimes it takes a while to sort of get your bearings on the institution before you can be prepared to provide feedback. So wondering what you're thinking around how students can be engaged given that.
So this is yeah, which has been a mechanism over time where we have really listened very much for getting that feedback. And I know that that's a passion of yours. I will also say the curriculum committee is really where the decisions about this get made, and there are student representatives on that. We also do surveys at the end, right? Both of capstone clients and of you to figure out what did you think as alumni, what did you prepare or not prepare? But I also think this faculty is one of the most responsive faculty I have ever seen in my life. And so I would just encourage you to continue to use that group and others to make sure that feedback is happening. So for example, that feedback that we got from the students about the existing race and policy class, and could it be I mean, that's exactly from the students. And now that's something that if the faculty approves, we will pass. So, and if you have more ideas, please let us know. Associate Dean for Teaching and Learning is in the room and we are open. So with that, I'm going to invite you to take this and become more participatory. We are going to gather in the other room. There will be 7 topics, Kiala? 6 topics that people will orient you when you come into the room, and you will be invited to sit down, listen to what work is going on, and offer feedback and insight, your resources, and help us take the next steps in some of these important priorities. So thank you very much.